if you are able to remember nothing else, remember that the X factor is partnerships, right? So it is, here in Erie, it is perfectly appropriate that we have limited time to talk about the most important thing. So it is the secret sauce, right? It truly is. It's without that. We go back to our opening comment on business as usual. Without that, you have business as usual. Okay. So a couple of points. When you're undertaking deals, when you are putting your project list together, what is the extent to which the team looks like it's always looked? Same players, same wallets, same degree of risk, same absence of shared risk, right? It's a big piece. If it looks like a duck walks like a duck, you know how this works. So it is very much the secret sauce. Second is partnerships facilitate the right level of distress. Right? They distribute the distress, all right, amongst those who are attempting to exercise leadership. You are not isolating one entity who's out there all by themselves. The distress that we're talking about is going to be found in each project, if it's the right project, in the form of adaptation that you're looking to help create, to mobilize. You're helping to mobilize a community to be able to adapt. Right? Partnerships give you your pathway to doing that. It's often said that, and I don't agree at all with it, that people hate change. Our view is people absolutely love change. They love when twins get announced. They love when they get a raise. They love when the quarterly report is a good quarterly report. They love when rents come in. I'm looking at Michelle, so when rents come in, right? What they hate is the prospect of being on the losing end of change and the uncertainty that comes with it, and not having any scaffolding to hold on to. Right? So a lot of what partnership begins to do is to modulate that distress, right, and to build a coalition for an outcome. So with those pieces in mind, we're gonna come to how to apply principles and projects, but in this network of partnerships. Okay, critical, absolutely critical to begin stepping out of those normal conversations, right? And I know I'm looking at Dave, I know I threw City Council under the bus a little bit earlier, but it was besides being, an easy target, the purpose is to begin diversifying the participation of the conversation, right? So that multiple voices are heard, and that disagreement isn't silenced, all right? And that we somehow figure out as a group of shared interests, all right, where to place our bets. Okay? It's about probabilities. You will only get there by virtue of partnerships. Pete?
All right, thanks, Charles. We'll transition from thinking about projects to thinking about partnerships by keeping one example in mind. We want to bring up the matter of a land bank. A land bank is an idea that's been talked about in Erie for a few years now. It's an idea that has gained traction in Michigan and Ohio as a key vehicle for dealing with some of the vacant property issues that a community like Erie faces. And in the plan, we identify a land bank as something that should be created that will enable a lot of the work that has to be done. But we want to make clear that creating a land bank is not a project. It's a vehicle that needs to be funded and needs to put those funds to use.
So let's pause. A land bank is not a strategy. So we read the newspaper online for the weeks prior to coming here. A land bank is not a strategy. It's a thing. Creating a land bank does not solve a problem. Having a land bank does not solve a problem. Right? It's very, very important that you understand that it's just a thing. Right? It's just an object. It's of no use until you put it to use. Right? Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's of no use until you put it to use and until you have the right partners around the table. So when you have funds in the hands of the land bank and the right people at the land bank, and you start strategically deploying those funds to strengthen assets, to align with the principles of the plan, then you have projects, then you are in the act of prioritizing, and then you're beginning to dig out from the deficit that Erie finds itself in when it comes to an oversupply of vacant and obsolete housing. So when thinking about a land bank, this is another conversation that needs to take place. Who needs to be at the table for a land bank to work? Who helps capitalize a land bank? Is it public sector? Is it private sector? Is it a combination of both? What sort of transactional partners need to be at the table of a land bank? How will a land bank be able to identify which, if you go with that option A a few slides ago, if you go with identifying 50 blighted properties surgically and remove them from otherwise stable blocks, how do you have the transactional capacity on staff at a land bank or at a land bank partner to do that identification work, to negotiate, to acquire the property? You need a partner to do the demolition work. And as Charles mentioned in reference to that Seattle project, how do you have the right partners at the table so that instead of granting a demolition contract to a firm from Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, instead you have trades organizations at the table. There's an effort to do deconstruction work that involves training local workers to gain new skills that are translatable to both demolition and to construction. How do you turn this massive demolition, the work that needs to be done, into a job creator, into a skill making effort that thinking about who all needs to be at the table and how to really maximize the investment that the city and the community is making in certain projects. That is a detailed conversation that needs to be had, and we might, in this afternoon, we might not be able to mention all of the valuable partners that could be brought to bear to making a land bank really effective. But that's a conversation that needs to take place before you think about just creating one on paper and then let's see where it goes.
So a question that we will ask our clients repeatedly. We're typically hired because we ask this question, and then our clients typically are frustrated because we continue to ask this question, which is, what problem are you trying to solve? Right? So the tool is the land bank, right? What's the problem you're trying to solve? The problem you're trying to solve, if you're engaged in single loop learning, is the acquisition and demolition of problem property. But if you're engaged in double loop learning, it's the acquisition and demolition of problem property that ties to confidence building, and you do it in a way that builds a human capital infrastructure that ties to other plans, that begins to move the market, and that begins to concentrate your investments. Right? It's just a tool until it's strategically coordinated. Right? So knowing what problem you're trying to solve will help you choose the right tools and then use them in a strategic way.
Yeah. And it's, the same conversation needs to take place around the idea of a housing court. This is another idea that's been talked about for a few years. We identified in the plan as a tool that should be in place to address blight and disinvestment, especially in neighborhoods that are relatively stable, where code enforcement really has a strong role to play in making markets stronger. But who needs to be at the table for a housing court conversation? It's not just that you need a judge or that you need a bench for that judge to sit at. That's one part of the conversation. But how does code enforcement in the city interact with the housing court? How do neighborhood organizations and neighborhood leaders interact with a housing court and with the city when it comes to gathering intelligence about properties that need to be dealt with and finding fair ways to work with property owners who might not have the resources to do the fixes that need to be done? There's a big conversation to be had about the partners that can make a really strong and effective housing court. And there are some really good examples like Cleveland, one of the national models of a really great housing court that has a wide variety of partners at the table. An innovation district, it's an idea that's now out there, that's being worked on, that's being thought about. Who needs to be at the table for this concept to yield the best outcomes so that in 5 or 10 years you don't just have something with a sign on it that says "Welcome to Erie's Innovation District," but it's actually a part of downtown that is yielding outcomes such as number of businesses generated, number of employees that are downtown now that weren't downtown 5 or 10 years ago. Think about the outcomes that you want from an innovation district. Think about who needs to be at the table to realize those outcomes. The idea of an iconic downtown Bayfront connection. Who needs to be at the table for that concept to yield the best outcomes? It's not just PennDOT. Who needs to be there to make sure that if you're going to execute something that is iconic and that is possibly of an $80 or $90 million range, that you're getting what you're paying for, and that you're really using that as a catalyst, not just to boost confidence and boost the markets around it there, the downtown Bayfront intersection, but how do you, again, use it possibly as a human capital development effort that ties in with the demolition work and other infrastructure work that needs to be done in the city. Then we'll finish here on our partnership slide, and Charles will talk a bit about this chart, which we brought up in various phases of the planning process to think about how to organize partners, how to organize resources, and how to think about executing projects, not just in the next year or two, but for the next decade.
So in this case, what you're looking at the top is a flow of resources, that funnel into a decision-making entity, and that decision-making entity perhaps partners with another one, but in effect undertakes one or more lines of work, or engages in one or more lines of work. What's important here when I look at that is your foundations do a great job, right? The corporations are doing a great job, but the residents are kind of AWOL in this community and having a share of mobilizing the city to stabilize and turn the Queen Mary, right? Who in this room, right, is willing to put the work? This is the adaptive work. Put the work where it belongs, right? Right now, too many Erie residents are too comfortable both asking for City Hall to solve their problems and blaming City Hall when City Hall doesn't solve their problems. And into that maw, that vacuum, right, steps a very committed corporate sector and a very sophisticated private philanthropic sector, right? Leaving these guys off the hook for their share of the dilemma, right? That conversation is part of the conversation that absolutely must occur. So as business as usual, if you will see a 0 here, a 50 here, and a 50 here, or a 0 here and something here, right? Then it's probably going to look like business as usual. Whatever it turns out to be at this end, this partnership needs to be pretty robust, okay? And then you will see that at the back end of the projects that flow from each of these lines of work.